In 1937, one of the most famous people on Earth disappeared without a trace. Her name was Amelia Earhart. She was attempting to become one of the first people ever to fly around the world. After traveling more than 22,000 miles, she was only one flight away from reaching her next destination. Then she vanished. The last radio messages were confusing. Search crews scoured thousands of square miles of the Pacific Ocean. The United States launched the largest and most expensive search operation in its history at that time. Yet no confirmed wreckage was ever found. No one has ever been able to say with certainty what happened to Amelia Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan. Today, we'll retrace Amelia Earhart's final journey. We'll explore who she was, why this flight captured the world's attention, what happened during her final hours, and examine the evidence behind one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. Because nearly a century later, the disappearance of Amelia Earhart remains unsolved. To understand how one of the world's most famous aviators could simply disappear, we first have to understand who Amelia Earhart was. Amelia Earhart was born on July 24, 1897 in Atchison, Kansas. Long before she became a global icon, she was simply a young woman fascinated by adventure. She climbed trees, collected newspaper articles about successful women, and never felt comfortable following the expectations placed on women at the time. Everything changed in December 1920. While attending an air show in California, Amelia took her first flight as a passenger. The flight lasted only about 10 minutes. But after landing, she later said, "As soon as we left the ground, I knew I had to fly." Only a few months later, she began taking flying lessons. To pay for them, she worked a variety of jobs, including as a truck driver, photographer, and stenographer. Flying lessons were expensive, but she refused to give up. In 1922, she bought her first airplane, a bright yellow Kinner Airster that she nicknamed the Canary. Later that same year, she set a women's altitude record by flying to approximately 14,000 feet. It was only the beginning. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, Amelia Earhart became one of the most recognizable pilots in the world. In 1928, she became the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean by airplane. Although she was a passenger rather than the pilot, newspapers around the world celebrated the achievement. But Amelia was never satisfied with simply being a passenger. In May 1932, she made history again. This time, she flew across the Atlantic Ocean alone, becoming the first woman ever to complete the journey solo. By the middle of the 1930s, Amelia Earhart had become far more than a pilot. She was an international celebrity, a best-selling author, a lecturer, and a symbol of determination. Millions of people followed her adventures through newspapers and radio broadcasts. Few names in aviation were more recognizable. Then she announced a challenge that would define her legacy: a flight around the world, one that would become the final journey of her life. By the summer of 1937, Amelia was preparing for the most ambitious flight of her career. She planned to circumnavigate the globe, not along the shortest route, but along one of the longest, nearly 27,000 miles. Her aircraft was a Lockheed Model 10 Electra, a twin-engine airplane specially modified for long-distance flights. Additional fuel tanks had been installed inside the cabin, giving the aircraft enough range to cross vast stretches of ocean. Flying with Amelia was an experienced navigator, Fred Noonan. Before joining the expedition, Noonan had worked for Pan American Airways, helping establish some of the first trans-Pacific air routes. Few navigators in the world had more experience crossing the Pacific. The first attempt began in March 1937. Taking off from Hawaii, the aircraft was damaged during takeoff. The flight was abandoned. The airplane was repaired, and the entire expedition had to start again. The second attempt began on June 1st, 1937. This time, Amelia chose to fly eastward around the world. The journey would take her across South America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and finally the Pacific Ocean. One by one, each stop was successfully completed. The aircraft crossed continents, deserts, mountain ranges, thousands of miles of open water. With every landing, newspapers followed the journey. Crowds gathered to see Amelia arrive. The world was watching. By the end of June, only one of the most difficult sections remained. The Pacific. Ahead lay a tiny island called Howland Island, just a small strip of land in the middle of an ocean covering millions of square miles. Reaching it would require extraordinary precision. Missing it by even a small distance could mean seeing nothing but open water. On the morning of July 2nd, 1937, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan departed Lae, New Guinea. Takeoff took place shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning, local time. Ahead of them lay more than 2,500 miles of open Pacific Ocean. Their destination was Howland Island, a tiny coral island barely more than a mile long. Finding it would be like locating a single speck in one of the largest oceans on Earth. As the flight continued, Amelia remained in radio contact with several ground stations. Weather reports were exchanged. Position reports were transmitted. For most of the journey, nothing appeared unusual. After more than 18 hours in the air, the aircraft was approaching the location of Howland Island. Waiting below was the United States Coast Guard cutter Itasca. Its crew had been preparing for days. Smoke was generated to make the ship easier to spot. Radio operators remained at their stations. Everyone expected Amelia to appear over the horizon. Instead, confusion began to grow. Radio transmissions were becoming more frequent, but communication was increasingly difficult. Amelia could transmit clearly, yet there was little evidence that she could hear the replies being sent back. One of her final messages reported, "We must be on you, but cannot see you." Moments later, she added, "Gas is running low." As the minutes passed, the situation became increasingly desperate. Another transmission followed. "We are running north and south." Investigators later believed Amelia and Fred Noonan were searching along the aircraft's estimated line of position, hoping to spot either Howland Island or the Itasca. Then the radio fell silent. No distress call was ever received. No further transmissions were confirmed. The Lockheed Electra Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had disappeared into the Pacific Ocean. The crew aboard the Itasca continued listening, hoping another radio message would come. It never did. Within hours, concern turned into a full-scale search. The United States Navy deployed ships across the Pacific. Aircraft searched from the air. The Coast Guard expanded its patrols. It became the largest and most expensive operation in American history at that time. For more than 2 weeks, crews searched an area covering hundreds of thousands of square miles. Pilots scanned the ocean for wreckage. Ships searched nearby islands. Every possible clue was investigated. Nothing was found. No aircraft, no life raft, no floating debris, no confirmed trace of Amelia Earhart or Fred Noonan. On July 19, 1937, the official search came to an end. After spending approximately $4 million, a staggering amount at the time the operation was called off. But the mystery was only beginning. Private expeditions continued searching for decades. Researchers revisited old radio logs. New theories emerged. And with every passing generation, the disappearance became even more famous than the flight itself. With no confirmed wreckage, no survivors, and no eyewitnesses to the aircraft's final moments, the disappearance of Amelia Earhart has remained open to interpretation for decades. The most widely accepted explanation is also the simplest. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan never found Howland Island. After hours of searching, the aircraft eventually ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific Ocean. The ocean in that region is several miles deep. If the aircraft sank there, it may still remain undiscovered today. Another theory points to Nick Maroro Island, a remote coral island located several hundred miles from Holland. Some researchers believe Amelia may have managed to land there after missing her destination. Over the years, expeditions recovered objects including fragments of personal items and human bones that were later lost before modern testing could be completed. To this day, no discovery has conclusively proven that Amelia or Fred ever reached the island. Perhaps the most famous theory claims that the aircraft reached territory controlled by Japan. According to this idea, Amelia and Fred were captured after landing in the Marshall Islands. Despite decades of investigation, historians have found no convincing evidence to support the claim. Most aviation researchers consider this theory highly unlikely. More than 80 years later, none of these explanations has answered every question, and without the aircraft, the mystery remains unsolved. Nearly a century has passed since Amelia Earhart disappeared over the Pacific Ocean. Despite decades of research, new expeditions, and remarkable advances in technology, no one has been able to answer the question that has fascinated the world since 1937. Did Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan run out of fuel before reaching Howland Island? Did they manage to land somewhere else? Or does the answer still lie hidden beneath the Pacific Ocean? Perhaps one day, the lucky Electra will finally be found, and with it, the final chapter of this story. Until then, Amelia Earhart's last flight remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in aviation history. Not because we don't have theories, but because, after all these years, we still don't have the answer.